I make a good squirrel tosser, huh, Eddie?
Yeah! Nice job, Monobrow! Let's head in!
Welcome to MojoPlays. And just because they're a critic doesn't mean they know everything. Reviewers often get it wrong when critiquing a game, and it happens way more often than you'd think.
We've some good news and some bad.
The bad news? We're going to destroy your precious islands.
The good, you won't be around to see it.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Cold Winter.
No identity, no family, no records. Our man doesn't exist. Invisible and perfectly disposable.
While Cold Winter wasn't critically panned upon release, perhaps the critics judged it a bit too harshly. Telling a story about covert operations and backroom deals, the story might not have been revolutionary, but the gameplay certainly was. Featuring more than 30 weapons, dismemberment, and an impressive ragdoll physics system, Cold Winter also utilized improvised cover, allowing players to manipulate the environment and even find materials to craft explosives or gadgets. Many reviewers wrote the game off as bland or boring, while players found quite a lot to enjoy in the game's twisty narrative, solid gunplay, and unique action set pieces. Had the reviewers been more open to Cold Winter's gameplay, mechanics, and story, perhaps more players would have discovered this hidden gem upon release.
Why should I trust you? My dear boy, in no way, shape, or form should you ever trust me.
Obscure.
Quit it, Josh. This is no time for that.
Come on, we need to record our investigation.
Quiet, someone's there.
Long before Until Dawn, Obscure was adapting the 80s teen slasher formula on the PS2. With 5 playable characters, as well as the ability to play the game in co-op, players must navigate their way through all manner of horrific scenarios in which any character can die and must use everyone's special abilities to solve puzzles. The game's many characters are all as cheesy as you'd expect, and all fit their archetypes nicely: the jock, the quiet genius, the outcast, etc. And the story is appropriately weird and over the top, feeling like it was ripped from a straight-to-VHS release in the 80s. While many critics love the co-op aspect of the game, they derided the title for leaning too much into familiar horror tropes and not doing enough to innovate on the formula. Gamers, on the other hand, had an absolute blast with the title, and Obscure still has its dedicated defenders even today.
Leonard, forgive me. I almost found the formula. I almost did it.
Predator Concrete Jungle.
And so it began. This tragedy of two worlds. This epic fall and rise of men and monsters.
For some reason, Predator has never had its Alien Isolation game, where the devs managed to perfectly nail every aspect of their adaptation. But Predator Concrete Jungle might be the closest we've gotten. Giving players access to all the Yautja's arsenal and abilities, critics lambasted the game for its controls, boring and repetitive gameplay, and graphical limitations. Gamers, however, accepted the game's flaws and set out on the streets in search of their next hunt. Even despite the oftentimes awkward camera and controls, the game was still a blast to play. Leaping around the city streets and sneaking up on unsuspecting prey proved to be a faithful recreation of what it must be like to hunt as the Predator. Hearing all the familiar sounds of the Predator's growls and weapons powering up is enough to make any nostalgic fan overlook any of the game's flaws and just get lost in the hunt itself.
Bruno?
You think that makes you the boss now?
Gauntlet Dark Legacy. The Gauntlet series is an OG staple of arcades, so naturally that experience was ported to consoles. However, even despite the game being an almost perfect port of the arcade original, with new levels, weapons, and even character classes, critics seem to be expecting more than just a fun hack-and-slash time with friends. While the game wasn't without its technical issues, the amount of fun the game offered, especially if you could get a full party of friends together, far outweighed any inconveniences the abrupt graphical hiccup might have caused. Maybe they just didn't have any friends to play with. Honestly, come to think of it, that's probably the most likely scenario. Being overcritical of something everyone else loves can really put a damper on the good times. The Getaway Black Monday.
And the rest? They were fast. It's what worries me.
Looks like we got some new contenders.
The Getaway was an ambitious open-world game that not only recreated the streets of London with stunning accuracy for the time, but also sought to create a far more cinematic approach to its storytelling than other crime sandbox titles of the time. However, while the original was lauded for this approach, the sequel, Black Monday, was widely criticized for the things that made the original such a critical darling. Reviewers were extremely critical of Black Monday, feeling more like an interactive movie than a video game, while others criticized the lack of innovation between the titles. However, gamers loved the impressively immersive world and story Black Monday created, and the more realistic approach to exploration, gunplay, and driving. While everyone agreed there were some technical issues, Black Monday pushed the aging PS2 to its limits. Gamers were more forgiving and allowed themselves to become immersed in London's crime underbelly.
So, hero, how'd you find us?
Good. Bit rough around the edges, but good.
Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2.
That looks like the city zoo's rear gate. If a rescue team's on the way, I'd better hurry. I have kind of a bad feeling about this.
With online gaming still in its infancy on the PS2, some titles were simply ahead of their time, and the Resident Evil spin-off series Outbreak was unfortunately one of these casualties. While the first game was relatively well received, its sequel bombed with critics, despite notable improvements to the game's formula. Considering File Number 2 was basically an expansion of the original, following the same characters just through new scenarios, many still unfairly compared the game to the obviously superior Resident Evil 4. For gamers, however, more of the same isn't necessarily a bad thing. Fans of the original applauded the improvements to gameplay and the new areas, and appreciated the game's classic approach to the Resident Evil formula while the main games were heading in a new direction. Of all the Resident Evil games from Capcom to remake, the Outbreak series deserves a second chance now that online play has become the standard.
He's not my favorite choice for a bodyguard, but oh well.
Echo Knight Beyond.
You're still here. Leave now. You shouldn't be hanging around here. Otherwise they'll find you.
Long before From Software was demanding its fans get good, they were creating some truly experimental titles across all genres. Echo Knight Beyond dropped players on a haunted space station and let them uncover its horrors while running for their life from its ghostly inhabitants. The game's unique approach to exploration through a first-person perspective, as well as its complete lack of combat, seemed to confound many reviewers used to the more typical survival horror games. The game was criticized for its slow pacing and repetitive environmental design. It's a space station. What were you expecting? Las Vegas in the stars? Much like the early days of the Souls games though, gamers were the ones who truly appreciated this new approach to a familiar genre with its unique gameplay design and deep, well-crafted, and rewarding narrative and atmospheric world.
Poor thing. Someday, you will understand what he meant.
Chulip. Chulip is an odd game, to put it modestly, and that might have been exactly what turned off so many critics from the game's charm. With the seemingly simple task of retrieving pieces of a love letter, the game adds the truly strange dynamic of raising your social status by kissing everyone in the village. The premise is weird, the gameplay is oftentimes confusing, and the seemingly lost in translation Japanese humor turned quite a few critics against the charming little game. Many gamers, however, fell in love with Chulip's undeniable charm, unique gameplay mechanics and puzzles, and the design of the town and its many interesting characters. Chulip is a game you either love or hate, but it seems to have more than won over those willing to give it a chance. Ed, Edd n Eddy, The Misadventures.
These clams look kinda hungry.
Plank says, bring it on, you sissies!
What the?
Cartoon Network licensed games are a dime a dozen, and most of them feel as though that was their budget. But there was something special about The Misadventures. While critics were naturally critical of nearly every aspect of the title's gameplay, mechanics, and graphics, gamers, and especially fans of the show, were much kinder to the Eds. The Misadventures perfectly captured not only the look of the show, but also the over-the-top zaniness of their adventures, and offered enough gameplay variety to keep players entertained. While critics disliked the game's repetitive nature and its short length, the misadventures felt like an interactive lost episode for fans who were able to look past many of the game's shortcomings and just enjoy their time with the Eds in the cul-de-sac.
Surely you just hands like a baby, Ed boy. Only after you have toiled in filth like the son of a shepherd can you use such a machine. Be gone!
Jeez! What's with that guy?
SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom.
Oh, no, wait! But I'm your master! I made you! No! Oh, my good China!
SpongeBob is not only one of the longest running series of all time, but he also has more video games under his square pants than any other cartoon. While a lot of these games were shovelware at best, Battle for Bikini Bottom was one of the most faithful adaptations of the Fry Cook. But, for whatever reason, critics still couldn't stand it. Maybe it was the fact it was based on a popular children's cartoon and their inner child had long since died, but critics seemed overly critical of what was arguably SpongeBob's best adventure. Thankfully, gamers were much more appreciative, and Battle for Bikini Bottom remains one of SpongeBob's most beloved video game entries, even earning a remake that was so well received it allowed the devs to create an equally well-received spiritual successor. Take that, you bunch of boring sticks in the mud.
Ouch! We won! Who wants to get ice cream?
I do!
Castlevania Curse of Darkness.
So be it. I must descend into darkness and reclaim that accursed power once more.
For some reason, adapting the classic Castlevania formula to 3D has been one of the most challenging hurdles for developers looking to update the classic series. And while most of them have been mediocre to downright awful, there have been some that manage the impossible. But not according to many of the uptight critics, however. Curse of Darkness was by far one of the better adaptations to 3D for the Castlevania series. But that didn't stop the critics from cutting it down over every indiscretion. The repetitive gameplay and environments were the go-to critiques for lowering the score, while fans of the series and newcomers were simply having a great time killing monsters with the game's many weapons and inventive upgrades. While it might not have been as great as its predecessor Lament of Innocence, at the very least, it's better than Castlevania 64.
Never seen that before. Quite impressive. It's enough to make your blood run cold.
PacMan World Rally. We'll be the first to admit, this is kind of a weird one. Ever since Mario Kart raced onto the scene, there has been no shortage of copycats and imitators trying to capitalize on the kart racer's popularity. One of these adaptations, by all accounts, should have been yet another in a pile of wannabes. But for whatever reason, while critics naturally took issue with adapting Pac-Man to a kart racer to simply capitalize on the genre's popularities, gamers loved this game. World Rally didn't do anything especially revolutionary, and even simply put a Pac-Man skin over most of the Mario Kart staples. But through solid gameplay, track design, and above all else, fun, gamers had a great time with this bizarre combination of Pac-Man and kart racers. And you know what? Good for them. Fun is the most important thing in gaming, and World Rally had more than enough to keep players racing. Extermination.
Please listen to what I'm telling you. Get out of here as soon as you can.
Tell me, what the hell happened here? What happened to my partner?
In the early 2000s, Resident Evil dominated the survival horror scene, and a lot of titles were unfairly compared to Capcom's Juggernaut series. Despite numerous interesting ideas such as a single upgradable weapon and the mutated creatures heavily inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing, many reviewers simply wrote the game off as another Resident Evil clone that lacked innovation to move the genre forward. Gamers, however, were much more welcoming of a new entry in the survival horror genre, and loved Extermination's creatures, atmosphere, gunplay, and campy horror story. While Extermination might not have moved the needle the way Resident Evil 4 would a few years later, there's a lot to be appreciated in a genre classic that offers its own spins on familiar gameplay tropes. And that's exactly why gamers loved Extermination.
You must be joking! This is a magnificent specimen! That's okay. He doesn't seem to like you either.
Windback Covert Operations.
Is this report accurate?
I know it sounds hard to believe.
Windback deserved a lot more praise and recognition than it earned. As one of the first third-person games to offer players the option to take cover during firefights, Windback would go on to inspire games that would later refine and perfect the system such as Kill Switch and Gears of War. Reviewers, however, couldn't see how revolutionary this new approach to gameplay truly was, and lambasted the game for its lackluster graphics, annoying controls, and ridiculous voice acting. Thankfully, gamers could see the potential of these new gameplay mechanics and rightfully applauded Winback for its impact on third-person shooters, and the game's campy narrative. As a game, Winback is average at best, but as a landmark title for its innovation, it's nearly unmatched.
That figures. The damn thing doesn't work!
Yeah, we noticed!
Crash Twinsanity.
Let's play mind games. This is the part where you run away screaming.
Crash had a really difficult time finding his footing after parting ways with original creators Naughty Dog, but Twinsanity, at least from the player's perspective, stands out as one of his best 3D adventures. Twinsanity not only gave players a seamless open world to explore in any way they chose, but also a myriad of gameplay styles to keep the tried and true platforming formula from growing stale, as well as a story full of gags and laugh-out-loud moments. And while gamers loved all these new additions, reviewers chose to focus mainly on the game's flaws, pointing out the game's sometimes unwieldy camera, as well as the controls for the many different playstyles throughout the game's many levels. While gamers were able to look past Twinsanity's many shortcomings and just have a good time, critics seem to feel the need to knock Crash from his rightful place as platforming royalty.
Your creation was a mistake, and your existence has been a constant reminder of that mistake. But I've learned something from all of this. I've learned that you can't run away from your mistakes, but you can bury them!
The operative, no one lives forever.
Let's not rush to judgment, shall we?
Rush to judgment? I think the facts speak plainly enough.
The operative, No One Lives Forever, is still widely regarded as one of the best shooters of the early 2000s, leaning heavily into the campy nature of 60s spy movies like Austin Powers before it. And while the PC version was highly regarded by critics, the same can't be said for the PS2 port. Critics were critical of the graphical downgrades made in the port and the title's poor optimization of the game's controls from PC to the DualShock. While the game remained relatively unchanged everywhere else, most couldn't look past these surface-level blemishes and give the port a fair shot. For those who've been dying to play one of the best FPS campaigns since GoldenEye, however, these were merely minor hiccups in an otherwise highly enjoyable experience that simply required a bit of patience to adapt to, something critics apparently were in short supply of at the time.
Adversity is the truest test of character. The strong are strengthened by it, the weak made weaker.
Way of the Samurai 2.
We'll win for sure this time!
Yeah!
While the original Way of the Samurai earned a decent reputation with critics, the same could not be said for its follow-up. While many reviewers were critical of the game for simply being more of the same, albeit with tweaks and improvements to the game's combat systems, they derided the game for its lackluster presentation, minimal improvements to the overall experience, and laughably bad voice acting. Fans of the original, however, loved the minor improvements and didn't see the need for Capcom to completely overhaul what worked so well in the original. With multiple endings, branching narrative pathways, and NPCs that reacted to the character's actions, critics might have been expecting something more akin to an Akira Kurosawa samurai experience, rather than a solid but campy samurai simulator.
Rat?
Who do you think you are, running into us without so much as a word of apology?
Rule of Rose.
Read the story. Please read the story. What happens next?
Breaking into the overcrowded survival horror genre is difficult enough, but it's even harder when manufactured controversy is actively working against your game. Amid rumors that many publications ran with of obscene content within the game, Rule of Rose already stumbled out of the gate, and critics took the opportunity to tear the game down for every minor inconvenience. Comparing the game, as they always do, to Resident Evil and Silent Hill, reviewers called the game bland, boring, and uninspired. However, even with all this criticism, Rule of Rose endeared itself to players with its classic horror-inspired atmosphere and narrative, and slow burn that focused more on psychological horror than outright jump scares. Amid all the controversy, Rule of Rose became a cult classic, and one of the most valuable and expensive physical PS2 games of all time.
Never forgive you! Not ever! And as for the rest of you, how could you believe all those lies?
Metal Saga. The PS2 was a beloved platform for JRPGs, but considering just how many released on the console, not every great game was given a fair chance. Metal Saga, the first entry in the long-running Metal Max series to release outside of Japan, received quite a lot of undue criticism from reviewers upon release. Nearly every aspect of the experience was chastised, from its dated graphics to the game's lackluster story and poor presentation. Critics just overall seemed overly critical of the entire experience. While reviewers refused to give Metal Saga a fair shot, gamers fell in love with Metal Saga's quirky humor, customization, and upgrade options for the game's battle tanks, the open-endedness of the game's world, and the game's beautifully composed soundtrack. Plus, you have your very own doggo who accompanies you throughout the entire game. Honestly, what's not to love? Godhand.
Come on, those guys are cake.
Not to mention, much sexier than you.
Well, your sexy little friends. They're coming for a dance.
The poster child for a game criminally misjudged, Godhand took such a beating upon release from critics, it likely led to the studio's closure. Judging the game on everything from its graphics to presentation, gameplay mechanics, and even the position of the camera, most sites were overly critical of Godhand, calling it bland, humorless, and just downright a struggle to play. While there has been a retrospective re-evaluation in recent years, gamers knew how good the game was from day one, and loved everything the game was offering. The solid and impactful combat, hilariously over-the-top characters and writing, and especially the unorthodox challenge the game offered when compared to its brawler contemporaries were all selling points. Gamers have long been critical of reviewers for being too hard on Godhand, and rightfully blame the out-of-touch reviewers for the game's failure.
No, I'm not ready to die.
Die? You're not gonna die. I'm just sending you home.
But I still want to have fun here.
It's only fun to you.
Which video game do you think the critics were way off base on? Share your picks in the comments below. Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips for MojoPlays, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.